And now that we are done talking about the main and co-main event of UFC 310, let's get into the rest of the card, and it starts in the featured bout of the evening, a rematch over 3 years in the making. The number 2 ranked heavyweight in the world, Ciryl Gane, is back, and he is taking on the number 3 ranked giant, Alexander Volkov. Number 2, number 3, title shot on the line? Ciryl Gane, man, what an up and down battle it's been with this guy, because when he came into the UFC back in August of 2019, he immediately took notice, right, of the MMA community's attention due to his physique. For one, he looks like he was sculptured out of marble. For two, it's his light movement of his feet. It's the way in which he prances about the octagon. He truly looked as if he would be the next generation of the heavyweight division, paired with the likes of Tom Aspinall, the current interim heavyweight champion of the world. And I'm saying this as if Ciryl Gane's just been a complete and utter disappointment and he's lost more fights than he's won, but that is just not the case at all. As a matter of fact, he started his UFC tenure 7-0, and that catapulted him into a title opportunity against Francis Ngannou. But that wasn't before coming an interim champion in his own right when he knocked out Derek Lewis August of 2021. In those first 7 fights in the UFC, 4 of them were by way of very convincing finish. And one of those victories that started off his 7-0 run in the UFC was Alexander Volkov. That was in June of 2021, a fight night main event where Ciryl Gane would get a 5-round unanimous decision victory, essentially outpointing Alexander Volkov on the feet for 25 minutes. Just didn't allow Volkov to get in a groove. He controlled the pace of that fight from minute 1 to minute 25. But in that undisputed title fight against Francis Ngannou, the title unification bout, I should say, in January of 2022, a razor-thin fight that came down to one mistake, essentially, from Ciryl Gane, leading to Francis Ngannou getting him on the ground and holding him there, being the deciding factor of a 48-47 victory where Francis Ngannou would still remain the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. As a matter of fact, Francis Ngannou would never lose his heavyweight title, as he would go on to vacate that belt and join the Professional Fighters League, box twice. We've seen him make millions upon millions of dollars and thrive in his professional career since leaving the UFC. But we'll leave Francis out of this and talk about Ciryl Gane, because right after that, he bounces back in September of that same year, knocks out Tai Tuivasa in front of his home crowd in Paris, France, and launches himself back into another title fight. And this time, it was a vacant title. That is because Francis Ngannou was no longer in the company. Ciryl Gane was no longer an interim champion, but he was put in the blue corner to welcome back the greatest fighter of all time, Jon Bones Jones. After a near 4-year hiatus, Jon Jones returned to the octagon, up a weight class at heavyweight, and disposed of Ciryl Gane in 2 minutes and 4 seconds. Ciryl Gane never even got to land a single strike in this fight before Jon Jones took him down and submitted him via guillotine to become the heavyweight champion of the world. We've seen Jon Jones go on to defend that title now against the former 2-time champion Stipe Miocic, most recently back at UFC 309 in November. But much like his fight in January of 2022 and a bounce back that he had later that year, Ciryl Gane would bounce back again in September of 2023 and again in front of his home crowd of Paris, France. This time, a second-round knockout of the polar bear, Sergey Spivak. Ciryl Gane truly has beaten the best of the best in this heavyweight division over the last 5 years. If you just look at the resume, I already mentioned Alexander Volkov, I already mentioned Derek Lewis, but let's add Junior Dos Santos, a former heavyweight champion. Let's add Jairzinho Rozenstruik, a perennial top 10 contender at this point, and we talked about Tai Tuivasa, and we talked about Sergey Spivak. But at the biggest moments, in the biggest fights, quite literally, with a title on the line, Ciryl Gane has faltered not once, but twice. And now he finds himself back in an opportunity to potentially put himself in the number 1 contendership spot. Now, I'm not going to get into this whole heavyweight title picture, but it seems as though Tom Aspinall and Jon Jones, hopefully, please UFC, fight in 2025. If they do not, if Jon Jones does retire, or if he vacates that belt, I think the winner of this fight will fight Tom Aspinall for an undisputed title shot in early 2025. But let's not put that too much out into the atmosphere for now. Regardless, you can't deny what's at stake here for Ciryl Gane and for Alexander Volkov. And for Drago, for Alexander Volkov, the 6'7" giant hailing from Russia, he's absolutely unprecedentedly, undoubtedly on the best stretch of his UFC career, and that is dated back now over 8 years when he debuted in 2016. Before that, let us not forget, he was a Bellator heavyweight champion, but now he finds himself on a 4-fight win streak, all against ranked opponents in this heavyweight division, and 3 of them are by way of finish. The first was Jairzinho Rozenstruik in June of 2022. He knocked him out in the first round. Then he finishes Alexander Romanov in the first round. Then he submits Tai Tuivasa in September of 2023. That was with an Ezekiel choke. How often do you see that in the heavyweight division? Answer, rarely. And most recently, in June of this year, he fought former training partner and ultra-dangerous Sergey Pavlovich, and he pieced him up for 15 straight minutes en route to getting the unanimous decision victory. So now Volkov has a chance to make it 5 straight wins to finally put himself in a potential title shot in this heavyweight division, and maybe more importantly to him, avenge the loss to Ciryl Gane that he suffered back in 2021. That is just one of 2 losses that Volkov has had since October of 2020. The other loss, it's to interim champion Tom Aspinall. At 36 years old, it's safe to say Volkov not only is on the best stretch of his career in terms of victories, but he is absolutely in his prime right now as a fighter in terms of his skill set and what he brings to the cage, what he has to offer to his opponents. I don't think this is another easy, point fighting decision for Ciryl Gane. I really don't. I feel like Volkov has come into his all over these last 2 years, and I could easily see him getting a victory in this fight. Now, am I guaranteeing that? Am I predicting that? Am I betting on that? That's a different discussion. But if you think Ciryl Gane's going to come in here and just walk right through Volkov, I think you've got this fight wrong. I think now, with what we've seen over the last 2 years, Volkov has evolved well enough to not only beat Ciryl Gane, but potentially finish Ciryl Gane and potentially capitalize on the weaknesses that Ciryl Gane has presented not once, but twice in both of those title fights with Jon Jones and Francis Ngannou, and that is his defensive wrestling, or lack thereof. Pair that with what we've seen of Alexander Volkov showing more of an offensive wrestling and grappling skill set. I think that is the biggest X and O question of this fight. Will Volkov learn from that first fight in that he couldn't quite find his range on the feet and look to take down Ciryl Gane, study the tape that we have seen now on 2 separate occasions? Let me know in the comments below, will Ciryl Gane go 2-0 versus Alexander Volkov, or will Volkov right the wrongs, make it 5 straight victories, and finally, at least maybe, get his shot to become the UFC heavyweight champion? Next up on the main card has to be one of the weirdest matchups in UFC history in terms of personalities. That is Bryce Mitchell, Thug Nasty, returning for the first time in over a year, still ranked in the top 15 of the featherweight division at number 13, taking on the unranked Kron Gracie. Bryce Mitchell last fought in December of 2023, December 16th to be exact, on the final pay-per-view of that year. Now he will fight on the final pay-per-view of 2024, but no fights in between, and that is because he suffered an absolutely devastating knockout loss to top 10 ranked former interim title challenger Josh Emmett. Josh Emmett had one of the best knockouts of 2023 in the first round, where he finished Bryce Mitchell just 1 minute and 57 seconds into their bout. It left Bryce Mitchell unconscious on the octagon floor for a very long time. It was one of the most vicious, brutal knockouts that we have seen in the 145-pound division's history. Pair that with another loss that happened for Bryce Mitchell against Ilia Topuria in December of 2022, and he's lost 2 of his last 3 bouts. The victory sandwiched in between is to Dan Ige. That happened in September of last year. But before this 2 out of 3 fight skid for Bryce Mitchell, he was 15-0 and he was 6-0 in the UFC before taking on the undefeated Ilia Topuria. Talk about undefeated prospects fighting one another in the co-main event with Shavkat and Ian Machado Gary. That is what we saw with Ilia Topuria and Bryce Mitchell in December of 2022 at UFC 282. We've seen what Ilia Topuria has gone on to do since then. Oh yeah, he finished Alexander Volkanovski. He finished Max Holloway. He is the undisputed best featherweight on planet Earth. And while we've seen Bryce Mitchell evolve as a mixed martial artist in terms of his stand-up game, we know what he is known for, and that is his elite level grappling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Of his 16 victories, 9 of them are by way of submission, one of just a few names in the UFC that have twister submission victories in the Ultimate Fighting Championships history. And his opponent, well, it's a Gracie. They're known for their jiu-jitsu, right? That is the 36-year-old Kron Gracie, who is 5-2 overall, but all 5 of his victories are by way of submission. Who would have thought?
Not me.
From December 2014 to December 2016, much like Kaya Sakura, Kron Gracie was a veteran of Rizin Fighting Federation. Then he debuted in the octagon in February of 2019. He beat Alex Caceres via submission, then fought later in that year and got defeated by Cub Swanson. And then he vanished off of the face of the earth. Didn't know what happened to the guy. He resurfaces at UFC 288 in May of last year against Charles Jourdain and loses, and then vanishes again, and he resurfaces now in December of 2024 to take on a top 15 featherweight in Bryce Mitchell. Guys, I don't know what else to really say about this fight, but it's one of the weirdest matchups in UFC history. And kicking off the main card, oh boy. Is this fight violent or is it violent? Nate the Train Landwehr is back, and he is taking on the Korean Superboy, Dooho Choi. Oh boy, back-to-back featherweight fights to start off the main card, but this one is beautiful chaos. This one is a certified banger. This one guarantees violence. Nate Landwehr debuted in the UFC in January of 2020, and in his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fight UFC career, not one of them has come close to sniffing the word boring. He's racked up a 5-3 record with a 3-fight win streak from October of 2021 to March of 2023. He then lost his biggest step up in competition to Dan Ige last summer, but has bounced back this year with a knockout in the first round over Jamal Emmers. And for Dooho Choi, the Korean Superboy, we did miss a large portion of his prime years due to his mandatory military service in South Korea, but he has come back and fought twice since then. His first fight was a draw with Kyle Nelson last February, and then in July of this year, he took on Bill Algeo and got a finish in the second round. He made his UFC debut way back 10 years ago in November of 2014 when he would have just been 23 years old. That's right, he debuted a decade ago and is still just 33 years old, now in his prime in terms of years that a lot of fighters see. But will the damage that he has succumbed to, will the military service hinder his true potential? Time will tell, and it will start here with Nate the Train Landwehr. Will Dooho Choi make it 2 consecutive victories and inch himself into a top 15 fight next, or will Nate the Train get the biggest win of his UFC career over one of the biggest names that he has fought to date? The prelim headliner will feature 2 top 15 light heavyweights and will feature 2 former title challengers, and to take it one step further, will feature 2 men that could have and should have beaten John Jones. That is right, it's Dominick Reyes, the Devastator, taking on Anthony Lionheart Smith. Dominick Reyes just picked up his first victory in June of 2024 since October of 2019. Sandwiched in between that 5-year gap of victories was a 4-fight losing streak, with 3 of them in a row coming by way of knockout, and the lone decision was to John Bones Jones, the fight that altered the career of Dominick Reyes as we know it. UFC 247, February of 2020, a 25-minute back-and-forth war where you could argue Dominick Reyes did enough to get his hand raised and become the first true person to defeat Jon Bones Jones, but a unanimous decision victory on the scorecards for Bones says otherwise, and then he would go on to lose by knockout to Jan Blachowicz, Jiri Prochazka, and Ryan Spann. That Ryan Spann fight was in November of 2022. We didn't see Dominick Reyes again until June of this year. That is when he finally got back in the win column, and he did it with a nasty 2-minute knockout over Dustin Jacoby. He is now back in the top 15. He's still just 34 years old, 13-4 overall. 10 of his 13 victories are by way of finish, with 8 of them by knockout. Dominick Reyes is still one of the most fun fighters to watch in this 205-pound weight class. And for Anthony Lionheart Smith, let's travel back in time to March of 2019 when he fought for a championship against Jon Jones, and he suffered an illegal knee to the head on the ground. But instead of taking the easy way out, quote unquote, even though the rules state he could have gotten the victory due to disqualification, he chose to fight on and lose a decision ultimately to Jon Jones. And then really his career was altered as well. But for Anthony Smith, and much the same of Dominick Reyes, they have quite literally fought the who's who of this light heavyweight division over the last 4 years. Anthony Smith would have gone on to beat Alexander Gustafsson, Jimmy Crute, Ryan Spann twice, and undefeated at the time Vitor Petrino, but he would lose to Glover Teixeira, Alexander Rakic, Magomed Ankalaev, Johnny Walker, Khalil Roundtree. Look at all of those names have either challenged for a title or been on the cusp of challenging for a title. Dominick Reyes losing streak, Ryan Spann perennial top 15, Jiri Prochazka former champion, Jan Blachowicz former champion, and Jon Jones, right? They have fought the who's who of the 205-pound weight class, and now they will collide together in the UFC 310 prelim headliner. Anthony Smith on the outside looking in the back half of his career, surely having lost 4 of his last 6 bouts. Can he right the ship? He got a victory in this year against Vitor Petrino where he submitted him in the very first round, but then fought on short notice against middleweight top 15 fighter Roman Dolidze and lost a decision to him at International Fight Week. So the question is, can Anthony Smith bounce back and make it 2-1 in 2024, or will Dominick Reyes make it 2-0 in 2024 and have the career resurgence continue? Next up, we have the number 14 ranked welterweight in the world and longtime UFC veteran Vicente Luque, a fan favorite. He is back and he is taking on Themba Gorimbo. Now, this fight was originally, for one, supposed to be in August of this year, and it was originally supposed to be Luque versus Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz has pulled out of both of their fights. This time, Vicente Luque remains on the card, having lost his lone fight in 2024 back in March to Joaquin Buckley. Want to go a little bit more than that. He's dropped 3 of his last 4 fights. The only victory is to Rafael dos Anjos last August. And Themba Gorimbo, a complete opposite career trajectory at this point, having won 4 fights in a row, most recently in October, where he got a decision over Nico Price. As a matter of fact, Themba Gorimbo hasn't even dropped a fight since his UFC debut. That was a submission to AJ Fletcher back in February of 2023. That is before the 4-fight win streak started, and now he will look to take on the biggest name of his career to date and get himself into the top 15 of this welterweight division. For most of you, you may not know that Themba Gorimbo is heavily backed by Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Themba Gorimbo's story of how he got to where he is today is a beautiful one for the 33-year-old from Zimbabwe that was sleeping on the couch of his gym, had $0 to his name. The Rock took him under his wing, related to him in that whole $7 story that Dwayne Johnson has, bought Themba Gorimbo a house, provided for him and his family, and ever since that story, Gorimbo has not looked back, and now will look to make it 5 straight victories, none bigger than Vicente the Silent Assassin Luque. Next up is the robbery of the year if we're talking fight card placement, and that is because it is Movsar Evloev, the undefeated phenom out of Russia in this featherweight division, taking on the former bantamweight champion turned featherweight contender Aljamain Sterling. Why is this fight not on the main card of UFC? Please explain it to me. It's not even the prelim headliner, for crying out loud. Movsar Evloev is 30 years old, right in his prime. He is 18-0, and he is currently number 5 in the world in the UFC featherweight division. He has won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 consecutive bouts under the Ultimate Fighting Championship banner, 3 of which are massive victories in a row. Dan Ige, Diego Lopez, and Arnold Allen, most recently in January of this year at UFC 297. And all 8 of those victories are by way of decision. He is an absolute grinder that can get the job done over the course of the full 15 minutes. We've yet to see him be tested for 25 minutes, and we will yet to see it again, as this is just a 15-minute bout with Aljamain Sterling. But I will say, even though Movsar is undefeated, it hasn't all been fun and games. In his fight with Diego Lopez, that was on short notice, Diego took him to the brink, nearly had him in a nasty knee bar, if I'm not mistaken. Movsar fought through it and got the decision. And then with Arnold Allen this year, a very close fight. Yes, it ended up being unanimous for Movsar, but you could have made an argument that Arnold Allen got back in the win column there. And for Aljamain Sterling, he is the former bantamweight champion that defended that title 3 times. Petr Yan, TJ Dillashaw, and Henry Cejudo. His loss that lost him the title was Sean O'Malley at UFC 292 last August. He then took a little bit of a break, bounced back at UFC 300, the biggest fight card in mixed martial arts history, debuted in the 145-pound weight class, and beat top 10 opponent Calvin Kattar very convincingly via decision. And now he will be paired up with another great grappler, that is Movsar Evloev. This one here, who's better on the ground, who's better in the grappling, who's better in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, who's better in the Sambo style wrestling, who's better in the American style wrestling. So many questions will be answered on who is the true best grappler in this featherweight division, and a title shot could very well be on the line. Oh, but the party doesn't stop there. It keeps on going with one of the most underrated fights of the night, but a guaranteed fight of the night contender, at least. I mean, after all, we do have Nate Landwehr versus Dooho Choi on this very same card. Randy Rude Boy Brown, friend of the show, may I add, taking on Bryan, formerly Pooh Bear turned Butcher Battle. Randy Brown has lost 1 time dating back to August of 2020, and that was to Jack Della Maddalena in February of 2023. Outside of that, he has tallied off a 7-fight stretch of victory, 7-1 overall over the past 3 years. 3 in a row over Wellington Turman, a finish of Muslim Salikov, and a decision over Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos. Now he will be taking on the Ultimate Fighter season winner, Bryan the Butcher Battle, who is 11-2 and is absolutely surging right now. One of the most fun fighters in the UFC welterweight division. Battle has won 3 consecutive fights, and you could make it 4 if the fight with Angelosa wouldn't have been stopped due to a no contest, but he literally just fought September 28th in Paris, France, and he beat the Frenchman Kevin Jousset, and he did it via second round TKO. He is on an insane run of momentum right now. All 3 of those victories are by way of stoppage. One of them came in 14 damn seconds. The only loss of his UFC career is to Henat Fakhretdinov, who is 23-1 or something crazy like that. I mean, come on, man. This guy, Bryan Battle, is as legit as they come if we're talking prospects in this division, and he's taken on another prospect turned veteran at this point in Randy Brown, who has climbed into the rankings but never quite gotten to that biggest spot. See the loss with Jack Della Maddalena that could have catapulted him into the top 5, but instead sent him back to fighting people in the back half of this division. Now with a victory here over Bryan Battle, Randy Brown can get himself back into legitimate contender discussions amongst the top 15 and even top 10. We have the rebooking from UFC 309 between Chris Weidman and Eryk Anders. We have top 15 Cody Durden taking on Joshua Van. Oh my word, another low-key banger, and especially if we're talking flyweight action. Joshua Van had one of the most insane fights of 2024 back at Noche UFC against Edgar Chairez, and he is now 4-1 in the UFC. The only loss is by knockout to Charles Johnson, and that came in the third round of their fight, and he is only 23 years old, yet he is 11-2 with 8 finishes to his name. And Cody Durden is on a great stretch of things right now when he's not taking short notice fights. He's coming off of a finish via submission, a ninja choke to be exact, against Matt Schnell back in September. Before that, yes, he did lose 2 in a row, but it was short notice Bruno Silva and Tagir Ulanbekov. Prior to that, had tallied off 4 victories in a row, so overall has won 5 of his last 7 bouts, and they have all come since June of 2022. He currently sits in the back half of the top 15 of this flyweight division. The 33-year-old Durden is in his prime, but still 10 years the elder of his opponent come fight night. We've got Michael Chiesa versus Max Griffin on this card as well, buried on the prelims. I mean, if that doesn't tell you how deep this card is, I don't know what will. Chiesa's coming off of a first-round submission over Tony Ferguson in Abu Dhabi back in August. But prior to that, had lost 3 consecutive bouts. But look at who it is. Kevin Holland, Sean Brady, and Vicente Luque. And before that stretch of things, he had won 4 fights in a row. So Michael Chiesa, 36 years old, no longer in his prime. He's in the twilight of his career, especially when you consider the work that he does as an analyst on the broadcast booth for the UFC, but he is still here for some fun fights, and I believe this one against Max Payne Griffin, the 39-year-old, is absolutely going to deliver. Max Griffin is never in boring fights, and he's coming off of a split decision win in 2024 over Jeremiah Wells. We also have Clay the Carpenter Guida and Chase Hooper. Come on, man. What even is this card? Clay Guida debuted in the UFC in October of 2006. Was Chase Hooper even born in October of 2006? Okay, it was a joke. Chase Hooper's 25, right? That's why I said that. He entered the UFC when he was like, 18, 19 years old, it seems like. Chase Hooper would have been 25, 1999, 2006, 7 years old was Chase Hooper when Clay Guida entered the UFC, and now they're fighting each other. And not to mention, Chase Hooper, since moving to lightweight, has been a dog, 3-0 at 155 pounds, 2 of them in a row by way of submission. And kicking off the card is a heavyweight fight between Kennedy Nzechukwu and Lukasz Brzeski. Kennedy literally just fought in October at UFC 308, where he debuted in the heavyweight division and finished Chris Barnett in the very first round. I'll tell you right now, I really like Kennedy Nzechukwu in this heavyweight division. Now at 32, in his prime, he belongs here at this weight class. He's a massive 6'5" guy, came in at 241 pounds in his last bout. Lukasz Brzeski, also a former light heavyweight turned heavyweight, not as much momentum as he has dropped 4 of his last 5 bouts. So let me know all of your thoughts for UFC 310 in the comments below. What are your predictions and what are your bets for this insanely stacked 14-fight card? If you enjoyed this breakdown of all of the biggest fights and the best storylines for this pay-per-view, drop a like and subscribe to the channel as it really helps this show grow. You can also join the community on social media at Verbal Spar MMA on X, Instagram, and TikTok. And you can follow on your favorite audio listening platforms such as Spotify and Apple, where every Friday and Monday podcast episodes release there. I hope you all enjoy the fights this weekend, and I will see you in the next video.